At 14 years old, she had long, flowing brown hair that turned heads wherever she went. Her hair had always been a source of pride for her, thick and healthy, cascading down her back like a rich waterfall of chestnut locks. It made her feel beautiful, confident, and unique. Her life was simple and joyful, filled with typical teenage concerns. School friends and the occasional bout of self-doubt. But her hair was always her constant, her signature. Her mother, on the other hand, was going through a difficult time. A once vibrant woman, she had just finished a grueling course of chemotherapy. The cancer was in remission, but it had left her hair thin, brittle, and almost gone. She tried to put on a brave face, but deep inside, she couldn't help but feel a pang of envy every time she looked at her daughter's thick, luxurious hair. It was a silent struggle, one that festered in the corners of her mind. One evening, after another long day of staring at her reflection, she confided in her own mother, "Mom, I can't take it anymore." She began, her voice tight with frustration. "She flaunts that hair of hers, knowing how I feel." Her mother, a wise woman in her 60s, sat quietly across from her, sipping tea. "You're jealous," she finally said. "But jealousy is not a reason to harm anyone, especially your daughter." "But I can't help it," the woman snapped. "Every time I see her brushing it, flaunting it, I feel so ugly, so less than." Her mother placed her cup down, looking her daughter straight in the eyes. "You've been through a lot. You're still beautiful. But punishing her for something she has no control over isn't going to make you feel any better. You need to find peace with yourself." The conversation didn't go as the woman had hoped. She wanted validation, but instead she received logic, and it didn't sit well with her. Later that night, a plan began to form in her mind. She could no longer bear seeing her daughter's beautiful hair. Something had to be done. The next morning, she announced to her daughter and her own mother, "Let's go shopping. We haven't had a nice day out in a while." Her tone was light, and her daughter, eager to spend time together, quickly agreed. Her grandmother, though suspicious, decided to come along, hoping that a day out might lift everyone's spirits. As they strolled through the shopping district, stopping at various stores, the atmosphere seemed pleasant enough. But after a while, the woman turned to her own mother. "Why don't you grab us all some coffee from that place we love?" Her mother hesitated. "Are you sure you don't want me to stay?" "I insist. We'll wait here for you." She smiled, masking her true intentions. Once the older woman left, the tension in the air shifted. The daughter sensed it immediately. Her mother's grip on her arm tightened as she steered her toward a barber shop they had passed earlier. Confused, the girl stopped in her tracks. "What are we doing, Mom?" "Just come with me," her mother replied curtly, her voice suddenly cold. Alarm bells rang in the girl's mind. "But I don't need a haircut." Without another word, her mother dragged her into the shop. The men inside, rough-looking and intimidating, glanced at them knowingly. It was clear they had been expecting her. The girl's heart raced. "Mom, please," she begged, trying to pull away. But her mother had already arranged everything. "You know what to do," her mother said to one of the barbers, her voice detached. She turned and walked out, leaving her daughter behind. The girl's eyes widened in horror as two of the men approached her, forcing her into the barber's chair. Before she could scream, one of them pulled out a pair of handcuffs, binding her wrists to the armrests. "No, please," she cried, her voice cracking as tears streamed down her face. "Don't do this." One of the men, clearly unfazed by her pleas, grabbed a pair of clippers. "Hold still," he muttered. Her long brown hair, her pride and joy, began to fall in thick chunks to the floor. She sobbed, shaking her head in a futile attempt to escape, but the handcuffs held her tight. The sound of the clippers buzzing filled the air, a cruel contrast to the girl's desperate cries. "Shut up." One of the barbers growled. "You're getting shaved." The clippers moved swiftly, reducing her once beautiful hair to nothing more than stubble. And soon even that was gone. They shaved her head clean, leaving her bald and broken. As the final strands fell, she sat there, stunned, her head now cold and bare. Her voice trembled as she spoke, her throat dry from crying. "Why did you do this to me?" she asked, her words almost a whisper, but laced with disbelief. "I'll go to the police. You can't just shave someone's head like this." One of the men, still holding the clippers, leaned against the counter, a smirk on his face. "Your mother called us," he said nonchalantly. "She told us exactly what to do. We just followed orders," he chuckled, crossing his arms over his chest. "We did the job. Simple as that." Her heart sank further at those words. The betrayal hit her like a punch to the gut. She couldn't comprehend how her own mother had orchestrated this. Tears welled up in her eyes again as she stood, trembling, and made her way toward the door. "Look at you now," one of the barbers called after her, his laugh echoing cruelly in the shop. "All that beautiful hair gone." As she stumbled out of the barber shop, still wiping the tears from her face, she spotted her grandmother walking toward her, holding 2 cups of coffee. Her grandmother's eyes immediately widened in shock as she took in the sight of her granddaughter, now bald, her face red from crying. "Where have you been?" her grandmother asked, her voice filled with concern. "Why did you take so long? And who did this to you?" Her hand trembled slightly, spilling a bit of coffee as she hurried toward her. The girl tried to hold back her sobs, but her voice broke as she spoke. "Mom, she made them do it. She dragged me to the barber shop and left me there. They shaved my head, Grandma. I couldn't stop them." Her grandmother's face turned pale with a mix of shock and disbelief. "Your mother did this. How could she?" Her voice trailed off, anger rising in her chest. She gently placed the coffee cups on the nearest bench and reached out to her granddaughter, pulling her into a tight embrace. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. This is unforgivable. She's gone too far this time." The girl clung to her, the tears she had been holding back now flowing freely. "I didn't know what to do. They handcuffed me, Grandma." It wouldn't stop no matter how much I begged. Her grandmother's jaw clenched. "We're going home and I'm going to deal with this. Your mother is going to answer for what she's done." She gently took the girl's hand, leading her away from the shop, her steps brisk and full of purpose. As they walked, the girl couldn't stop thinking about her mother's betrayal. She had never imagined something like this could happen. How could her own mother, the person who was supposed to love and protect her, orchestrate something so cruel? When they arrived home, the atmosphere was tense, filled with an unspoken rage that was about to erupt. Her mother was already there, sitting in the living room as if nothing had happened. Her grandmother wasted no time. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she demanded, her voice sharp and furious. "How could you do this to her? She's your daughter." Her mother's face remained cold, her arms crossed defensively. "I had to. She needed to learn that life isn't always fair. It was time for her to stop flaunting that hair, to understand how I feel." Later that evening, after the confrontation between her mother and grandmother, her boyfriend came over. He had heard bits of the argument and could sense that something terrible had happened. When he saw her sitting on the couch, her head bald, eyes still red from crying, his heart broke. "What happened?" he asked gently, kneeling in front of her and taking her hands. "Tell me everything." She hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to start, but the pain was too fresh to hold back. "My mom, she took me to the barbershop. She made them shave my head." Her voice cracked as she tried to hold back the tears. "I didn't want this. I begged her to stop." His face darkened with anger as she spoke. "She did this to you." His voice was low, full of rage. "Please, why would she?" "She said it was to teach me a lesson," she whispered. "Because her hair's so thin now, after the chemo. She said I was flaunting mine." He clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. "She has no right," he muttered, standing up abruptly. "She's crossed a line." Without another word, he marched into the next room where her mother was sitting, still defiant, after the confrontation with her own mother. "You think this is okay?" he growled, his voice shaking with anger. "You think you can treat her like this just because you're jealous?" Her mother scoffed, barely glancing up at him. It's none of your business, she needed to learn. You don't deserve to call yourself her mother, he said coldly. He grabbed a pair of clippers from the counter, turned them on, and walked toward her. You like control, don't you? Let's see how you feel when it's taken away from you. Her mother's eyes widened in fear. No, don't you dare, she shrieked, trying to push him away. But he was too strong. He pinned her to the chair, and despite her struggling, shaved her head clean. Her screams echoed through the room, but he didn't stop until every last strand of hair was gone. When it was done, he threw the clippers down and reached for his phone. You're going to pay for what you did, he said, dialing the police. This isn't just about hair, you've traumatized her, and you'll face the consequences. In the days that followed, her mother was arrested. The police charged her for the abuse, and it wasn't long before her case went to court. Her actions were deemed cruel and abusive, and she was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. In the prison cell, she was left to reflect on what she had done, but any remorse she felt was drowned in her bitterness. Her grandmother, who had arranged the justice along with her boyfriend, disowned her. You're no longer part of this family, her grandmother said coldly during the court proceedings. You lost the right to be her mother the moment you laid a hand on her. The will was changed, cutting her mother out entirely, and the inheritance was passed on to her daughter. Although the road to healing would be long, the girl found comfort in knowing she was finally free from her mother's toxic grasp. Surrounded by people who truly loved and supported her,